So after you've gone through the gauntlet of identifying a bunch of potential quality suppliers, the next step is really to start to define the kind of product you want to make with them, looking at their catalog, and really finding the closest fit to what you think your product's going to be, even if it requires some customization now or down the line. And you're going to want to work on samples. Typically, I only like to order samples from folks that I really liked in the communication phase of identifying a supplier, so they answered all the questions, they were effective with communication. Also, if their ballpark pricing and capabilities seem to be a fit, then it makes sense to make the investment to get into samples. So really in this video, we are going to review the process for getting samples, including key considerations to make the most of this process. There's really two kind of things I like to do at the sample stage. One is to gather factory samples from the high potential, high quality factories that you identified in your factory search. And then the second is going to be to gather competitor samples. So starting off with factory samples, a couple key things here as best practice frameworks that you can leverage. First of all, the goal is really just to validate the existing product that most closely aligns with your concept and what it's all about. Test the quality, test the features, how does it look and feel, all those things, right? It doesn't necessarily need to be the final version of your product at this stage. In fact, oftentimes this first sample is literally just something that they've got kind of in their sample set. It's not custom at all, but it gives you a really good barometer, a directional barometer of what you can expect as you take that kind of raw concept and sculpt it into what it is that you want to develop for your offer. So evaluating the materials, quality, sizing, packaging, shipping, all those things matter. A key point on packaging. I always am very, very explicit at the sampling stage that I don't want it just like wrapped in a plastic bag and taped into a box. I want to see the exact packaging materials, dimensions, shape, how they protect it, everything as it's going to be or close as it's going to be after production. So that's a big thing. You don't want to spend all this money on international air freight only to get a product that doesn't truly reflect end-to-end the potential product that you're going to get in terms of packaging. And then sometimes you may want to test customization options. So if you want to kind of have them test a logo on your product or a logo on the packaging or a new color run, sometimes you can do some of those customizations during this stage as well. But oftentimes it's typically a follow-up round of sampling where you're really going to be looking at your production ready samples and some of those customizations that you implement. And really what you're going to be assessing here, honestly, again, kind of wear the no bullshit hat when you're kind of doing this assessment, but do a SWOT analysis. What are the strengths of the products? What are the weaknesses of the products? Where do you think the opportunities for improvements are? And what do you think are the threats that could potentially lead to either dissatisfaction, bad reviews, and or the potential to really not have the value in your offer that you're looking for? So be looking for those blind spots as well. In terms of competitor samples, it's a pretty similar exercise, honestly, except you're typically just going to be ordering from Amazon. A big thing here is really just to evaluate the overall quality and kind of the general kind of packaging and everything, how they put it together. You can also look at their size here too and see if there's some size optimization opportunities from a packaging standpoint to get you to a lower pricing tier. So that is one thing that's helpful. And then the big thing here is really just to spot those gaps and weaknesses within a competitor's product. Reference their 1-star, 2-star reviews explicitly and see if you can kind of experience that yourself as a potential customer as you're reviewing this, and make sure that you try to cover those blind spots when you're developing your own product. And then really just answer this question: where can they be beaten? Where can you have a substantial advantage in creating a valuable offer with your product versus what you have in your hand from a competitor? And then the other thing that's really valuable too is you can reverse engineer funnels. So you can see if they've got an insert card or how they communicate to customers. All those elements that you can kind of reverse engineer and just see what you're up against. Sometimes you can see if you're up against black hat people, if you're up against sophisticated people, or if you're up against just somebody that's just chucking a product on Amazon and there's not a whole lot to it. So you can do some non-product stuff there as well with the competitor samples. So generally what I'm doing when I'm getting samples from China is you typically want to try to find a freight forwarder if you can that you work with on a regular basis. I leverage Forwarder One. We're going to leave the link to them at various points throughout this course, but they've got some China-based warehousing. So the cool thing about that is if you're working with, say, 4 or 5 factories to get samples in and around the same timeline, you can have them ship it all to Forwarder One in China. They can consolidate it into one box, and that can substantially reduce your pricing. Typically, most samples are going to cost about like the factory cost. Sometimes they give them to you for free, but generally it's going to be, factory cost, sometimes a little bit more because it's a sample. But where it really gets expensive is the freight. So typically air freight is anywhere from $50 to $100 depending on the size of that particular product you're shipping. So when you can consolidate it in China and have a bunch of them, versus spending $250 on freight to send 5 boxes, you could send 1 box for $50 or $60 using 4 to 1. So I definitely use shipping consolidation where possible. And then I typically just pay via Alibaba for the samples versus a wire. Again, wire costs, I don't think it's like $35 to send a wire. So it's just a lot simpler to pay via the Alibaba link and have them send over that before you pay for the sample. And you're typically on the hook for both the sample and the air freight in these situations for sample orders. And then I would also just say, I know a lot of people like try to get stingy at this stage and kind of really grind out potential factory partners for them to pay for the sample, or like, I don't want it to be $20, I want it to be $5, like that kind of stuff. Honestly and truly, I'm like a bleed blood from a rock kind of negotiator when I need to be. But this is one in terms of setting the tone for the relationship that I would not use a card on this at all. I would pay the $20 for the sample. Don't kind of nitpick with them on the price or anything like that. They don't know who you are yet. They don't know if you're legit. You don't want to raise your own red flags to them that you aren't a good business partner and you're going to kind of nickel and dime them. So expect to pay for the sample. I think it's a good thing to do. But one thing that's super common, I would definitely recommend asking for it, is that any samples are actually credited back on a production order. So let's say that I order a handful of samples and I pay for shipping. I'll just ask that gets credited. If I go drop a $15,000, $20,000 PO, I'll get that deducted. So it's not a lot of money, but you can obviously get that recouped if it makes sense. So that's the sampling process.